more. Welcome back to Co-Work Radio here on KZSB 1290 AM. I'm Catherine Raymock.
And I'm Jane Walker-Wood. We are here with James Rogers. James is founder and CEO of Apeel Sciences. He's on a mission to fight food waste and build a sustainable food system. How are you doing there, James?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you for having me here today.
No, it's so good to see you. I've heard the story, but I'd love to hear from you how you came up with this idea. You were driving somewhere, is that right? You saw something?
Yeah, I did a lot of driving in graduate school. And the good thing about graduate school is you can set your own hours. You just got to get the work done, but you can do the work whenever you want. So I used to I actually came to UCSB to do my PhD in materials engineering, and the project that I was working on was related to the solar paint. The idea was you could mix up a solar paint, you could pour it on a table and let it dry, and when it dried, it would self-assemble into this structure.
What is solar paint?
Yeah, it's enables you to harvest solar energy from paint. So imagine you could paint the wall, and
then you can.
What
wow.
a great idea.
Why don't people solar paint electric cars?
That's coming. Yeah, it's a lot of technology development. So I was doing my PhD studying how you could make this efficiently, how you could make it cost.
So it doesn't exist now. This is a new product.
There's some niche applications of the technology today, but
okay. Sorry, but so you were
no,
developing
please.
solar paint.
Yeah, well, I was studying it anyways. They'd figured out that you could make this paint, you could let it dry, you could plug some electrodes into it, charge a phone or a battery, and I thought, wow, what a cool thing to study and potentially help commercialize. But they saw this effect that if you took one paint and you let it dry, and you took the second paint, same exact paint, and let it dry, but covered up the second one so that it took longer to dry, that when you measured the efficiency of the paint, the one that took longer to dry was twice the efficiency of the one that dried more quickly. So nothing changed inside of it, same composition, just something had happened from a molecular standpoint, the way the molecules had arranged, that resulted in dramatically higher efficiencies of these slower drying paints. And so you can imagine that watching the paint drying process isn't all that exciting.
No. It's like the pot boiling process.
It's like, it's the actual embodiment of that phrase. But to make that more interesting, because that's what I was studying, you have to use fancy equipment. And some of this equipment happened to be up at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. So I would make the samples here, the paint samples here, and I'd drive them up to Lawrence Berkeley National Lab to actually watch that paint drying process and try to figure out what was going on. And I used to take my time getting up there, drive during the day, listen to podcasts, music, et cetera. And on one of these trips, I was listening to an article about how we're going to feed 10 billion people on this planet. And it's kind of one of those things where you hear about world hunger and you go, well, that's too bad, but what can I do about it? But at this time, I happened to be driving through the Salinas Valley, which is considered the salad bowl of the United States.
You throw a seed and something grows.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
And so that was actually the thought that crossed my mind was, while I'm driving and hearing about this problem, I'm looking around, and as far as I can see, it's these lush green fields. And the thought occurred to me, we've got these magical seeds that we throw in the ground. They absorb water, they absorb sunlight, they produce food, and oh, by the way, they self-propagate. How is it that we're screwing this up so badly that people on this planet are going hungry? And obviously, a naive perspective, not having grown anything, it just seemed that if we have these magical seeds, it seems like we're screwing something up if people are going hungry. So, I got curious about it, and I thought maybe it's a production problem. Maybe we don't have enough land, or maybe the yields are very low or something. And so I did the math. I got up to the lab and I looked up how many people are on the planet, how many calories people need per day, and what the total amount of agricultural land was, what the average yields were on that land. And if you compare it and how many calories you'd get out of that, and if you do the math, we're producing way more than enough calories in order to feed that population.
The problem is so much of it's going to waste, right?
And that turns out...
Isn't there also a problem that people are eating more than their calories?
Well, I'm an example of people
eat.
Eating more calories than they need. So yes, it comes down to a distribution problem.
But so how much food is actually wasted that is produced? Is a third of the food I've heard, or somewhere in that
So the estimates range.
Uh-huh.
In the United States, people report somewhere between a third and a half of what we're growing.
That's
ending up in
amazing.
landfill. It is. It
And
really
a lot
is.
of that's the grocery stores are having to throw a lot of stuff out, aren't they?
Yeah, if you look at how losses are distributed throughout the value chain, you can kind of think about it from production all the way to retail, all the way to the consumer. And the production transportation losses are significant, but relatively modest when compared to the losses at the retail level, and very, very modest compared to the losses at the consumer level.
That's interesting.
Before we go too much further, for people that don't know what Apeel Sciences is, give us a
what is your
view
product?
of the product
Sure,
and how
sure.
it preserves food.
We use food to preserve food, which is the simplest way we can explain what we're doing. And to be more practical about how we do that, what we do as a company is we take discarded plant material. So things that are left behind on a farm after processing. We're fortunate to be in Santa Barbara for a number of reasons, one of which is that they produce a lot of wine here. And when you produce wine, you press those grapes, you ferment the juice into wine, and you generally throw away the grape pomace, the stuff that's left behind. We take that stuff from processors, we extract the remaining edible oils that are left behind in there, and then we purify and isolate those different edible oils into different bins. Molecule A, B, C, D, E, F, G,
Now, are
et cetera.
there chemicals involved doing that?
It's taking the molecules that nature's already making and producing and then isolating them.
So this is natural.
That's right. And the molecules that we use are the same molecules that nature is using to defend itself. So what we do is we take those materials from the parts of the plant you're not eating that are being discarded, and then we isolate them and we recombine them into very particular ratios to create these formulations. The formulations are specific and they're tailored to different kinds of produce. So there's a different formulation for a strawberry relative to a banana, relative to a blueberry. And it's a powder, so we ship it to where we'd like to use it. We mix it back up with water, and then we dip fresh produce into that solution, or we spray that solution onto the surface of the fresh produce, and we allow it to dry. And when it dries, it leaves behind this imperceptibly thin barrier of plant material around the outside of the produce.
Can you taste it? So on a banana it wouldn't matter because you take the peel off anyway. But if it was on an apple, would it be anything that I could taste? No.
Completely imperceptible. You can't see it, you can't taste it, you can't feel it.
And how much longer shelf life is it giving produce?
So it depends on the produce category. Every category has a different challenge that you're trying to address, but in most cases with our commercial products today, we can get a doubling of the shelf life of the product. And in our laboratories today, we're able to get a 3x extension across most categories, and we have pathways beyond that.
Now, I've noticed that when I buy organic produce, it doesn't last as long as the stuff that has chemicals on. Does that make a difference when you spray on organic versus non-organic?
So the mechanisms that cause produce spoilage are universal. So the things that cause produce to spoil are water loss and oxidation. So that is water evaporating out of the produce, causing shrivel and weight loss, and oxidation, basically oxygen getting inside the produce. And so we haven't come up with some new chemistry that's interfering with some type of pathway. We're creating a physical barrier on the outside of the produce that acts to physically slow down the rate water evaporates out and the rate that oxygen gets in.
Do I wash the fruit when it comes to my home? Because normally I wash whether it's organic or not.
You certainly can. The materials that we use are
stay
food.
On.
They are
Okay.
Well, they're food. So when you eat them, they get used by your body the same way that any other food would be used.
How difficult was this to get through the FDA, and what sort of approval did you need? And was this years in the making, or?
This whole thing has been many, many years in the making, about a little over 6 years now. From a regulatory perspective, this is a really good question. I often get asked, is this product FDA approved? And the answer is no. And the reason for that is FDA approval is required for chemicals that nature's never seen before. So if you go into a laboratory and you make up a new chemistry that nature's never seen before, there's a reasonable expectation that nature doesn't maybe know how to work with that material. So you need to do these longer FDA approval processes because you don't know what's going to happen when it ends up in the water. You don't know what's going to happen in the soil, if an animal eats it, et cetera. Now, because we've been eating foods for hundreds of thousands of years, There's a separate process which the FDA said, hey, there are millions of different types of food molecules out there that people have been eating for hundreds of thousands of years. We're not going to go through and do an FDA approval process for each of those, things like sugars and starches, these things, because we've been eating them for a very long time, and we're considering that the body of evidence.
Now, is there any nutritional value in the coating, or is it just so – because you mentioned it was made out of fibrous material, which is actually better for you than the inside of the fruit?
It's such a small amount of material that we don't advertise any sort of nutritional value. Now, we have looked at things like including vitamin A, for example, for treatment in places of the world that are deficient in vitamin A. So there's some opportunities in that space, but the real benefit comes from maintaining the earlier state of the produce, and by that I mean the produce when we treat it is effectively younger when you receive it. So it is quote unquote fresher when you get it. And when that happens, you actually get higher nutrient levels inside of the produce. So it's not that we're adding anything to it. We're helping maintain the natural vitamin and mineral content that's inside of the produce.
Now, it's interesting. People grew up in California. They'd be like, what are you talking about? When I moved here I was originally from Manitoba, and we would have months when we would keep food in the cellar for storage, mainly potatoes and turnips, because we had no fresh fruits and vegetables.
That's right. Yeah.
And before I came to the States, I'd never seen freshly squeezed orange juice. So for people who are outside of Santa Barbara, they're like, I don't understand this limitation of keeping fruit fresh.
We are incredibly fortunate to be in Santa Barbara for a number of reasons, one of which is virtual year-round supply of some really nice produce categories. But most people don't have access to that, right?
Yeah. Is the food coated here and then you send it to wherever it's going?
It depends. So we work with some local organic producers that treat produce right here, and then that enables them to get long enough shelf life where they're able to ship it all around the world. And they couldn't do that before.
That's incredible.
We're talking with James Rogers. He is the CEO of Apeel Sciences. And when we're going to take a short break right now, when we come back, though, we're going to have a quick lesson on polymer physics. And then also,
people are turning off the show.
I want to talk about the growth of your company, because this is pretty incredible. You're at about 85 employees now, but you just told us over the next year you're going to hire another 75 employees.
That's right.
That's amazing, especially for this area, and you're out in Goleta. So hang in there with us. We'll be back right after this.